These are the notes for section 8.5, factoring polynomials completely. Example 1 says to factor 12x to the third minus 75x. The first thing we want to do is factor out the greatest common factor. 12 and 75 both have a factor of 3. And x cubed and x both have a factor of x. If we multiply 3 times 4, we get 12. And x times x squared gets us back to our x to the third, x cubed, minus 3 times 25, 75, and we already have our x term. Now we have to look at the 4x squared minus 25 and factor that into two binomials. 2 times 2 multiplies to 4. 5 times 5 multiplies to 25. Because there is no x term, the coefficient of the x term is 0. So we know with 3x, if we multiply 2x plus 5 times 2x minus 5, it will multiply back to 12x cubed minus 75x. Don't forget that 3x that is also multiplied by the binomials. Example 2, factor a squared b minus 7a squared minus b plus 7. Since there are 4 terms, we are going to try to factor by grouping. From the first 2 terms, we can factor out an a squared. And inside our parentheses, then we will have b minus 7 minus, if we factor a 1 from both of those terms, it will be b minus 7. Negative 1 times the b is our negative b. Negative 1 times negative 7 is plus 7. Now both of those terms have a factor of b minus 7. So our two binomials are b minus 7 times a squared minus 1. That a squared minus 1 can be factored into two binomials. Keep that b minus 7. It's going to factor into a plus 1 times a minus 1. Example 3, we're going to factor 4x cubed plus 28x squared minus 120x. The first thing we're going to do is factor out a 4 from each coefficient, and we can factor out an x from each term. X squared plus 7x minus 30. Now to factor that trinomial into binomials, we're going to ask what multiplies to negative 30 and adds to 7. Excuse me. And it's going to be positive 10 and negative 3. 4x is the first part of our product. X plus 10 times x minus 3. Example 4, we're going to factor 9x squared minus 81. First factor out a 9. We're going to have x squared minus 9. 3 times 3 is 9, so keep that 9 out in front, and then we'll factor into x plus 3 times x minus 3. Example 5, again, has 4 terms. Factor a squared b minus 3a squared minus 16b plus 48. There are 4 terms, so the first idea should be to factor by grouping. A squared from the first 2 terms, and that leaves us with a b minus 3. Minus, if we factor out a 16, times b minus 3. is b minus 3 times a squared minus 16. b minus 3 times a plus 4 times a minus 4. That a squared minus 16 factors into the a squared plus 4 times a minus 4. Example 6, we're going to factor 9x squared y minus 48xy plus 48y. Looking at the coefficients, we can factor out a 3. And then looking at the variables, we can factor out a y. Inside our parentheses, we're going to have 3x squared minus 16x plus 16. Going to need to determine what multiplies to 48 and adds to negative 16. Okay, so our factors of 48, 12, and 4. And if they're both negative, that will work for us. So 3y times 3x squared minus 12x minus 4x plus 16. Now inside those parentheses we have 4 terms, so we'll factor by grouping again. 3y, we're going to have 3x times x minus 4 minus 4 times x minus 4. They both have a factor of x minus 4, so it's 3y times x minus 4 times 3x minus 4. Those are the notes for section 8.5, factoring polynomials completely.